Hi everyone, welcome to week 8 of the 2017 Oregon Conference Free Methodist Experience. This week we're going to be looking at a period of church history that was very messy, and two big influences upon Methodism that could be found in the middle of that mess. One was Jacob Arminius and the understanding of Arminian theology. And the other is the German Lutheran Pietists and their emphasis upon heart formation, small groups, and mission. Both of these would affect John Wesley from slightly different angles. Arminianism would come through the Church of England, and small groups and heart piety would come through his time spent with the Moravian Brethren. But both are important to our Free Methodist identity. There's quite a lot to cover this week, so just be aware I'm going to be going quite quick. So here we go. So we start off in 16th and 17th centuries Europe. Europe is a mess. There's lots of German princes. There's countries that are beginning to form, and everything politically really just begins to be a mess. You already saw how this was beginning to form back in the Reformation, where the princes were using Protestantism to lever their way away from Rome and the power of Rome. So you'll notice at this point the map of Europe looks very different to the modern day. Like there's no Italy, for example. Greece and Albania and that don't exist as anything. So there's lots of different political things going on in the world. And really big around this time is the development of the nation state. And here nation really became also linked to what religion you had amongst, and which monarch you obeyed. And understand this had never really existed before. In the feudal system, you were only ever just loyal to your lord, and whoever your lord was loyal to, that was it. Now what's happening is, instead of small feudal lordships, and maybe there's a prince somewhere, we're beginning to get an understanding of nationalist identity. And it's forming especially around religion, amongst other things. And there is a lot of fighting happening because of this. There's a lot of birth pains with the shift from a feudal system to a monetary nationalized system. Countries are internal. France is torn between Protestant Huguenots and Catholics. England is swinging between Catholic, Anglican, back to Catholic, to Puritan, back to Anglo-Catholic. Holland is having a fight between Arminius and the Reformed churches. Germany has regional princes arguing over what form of Lutheranism is the correct form of Lutheranism. The Spanish Armada is attacking England. There's the 30 Years' War in the continent. The English Civil War tears the country apart. It's a mess. And it's mostly because of religious difference. In fact, everyone's so obsessed trying to convert other people to their own form of Protestantism from one form of Protestantism, or from Catholicism to Protestantism, that Protestant mission basically is non-existent in other parts of the world. Because the Protestants are so busy fighting amongst themselves, or just trying to make Catholics into Protestants. And in the midst of all this, many of the more extreme factions will leave for the New World. The Puritans, the Quakers, the Hutterites, the Mennonites. They're all going to leave for the New World. And it's in the middle of this mess that we find Arminius and the German Lutheran Pietists. So let's start with Calvin and Arminius. Here's a little joke meme. The third law of theology: for every theologian there is an equal and opposite theologian. That's Calvin and Arminius, who are going to be the two main standpoints in the debate. Now understand, there's going to be a point I'll shift in this discussion. I'm going to use Arminianism and Wesleyanism fairly interchangeably. That's a little unfair, but they'll be fairly interchangeable. So Arminius takes on Reformed theology. Arminius was a Dutch guy, a clergy member in the Dutch Reformed Church. He studied under Calvin's protege, Beza, who was a strong advocate of predestination. Beza was actually not just a strong advocate of predestination, but a strong advocate of what we'll call later supralapsarianism, or double predestination. So God chose not only to save some people, he also chose to destroy some people. Arminius was both pastor and university professor, University of Leiden. and he came into conflict with the church for allowing human free will to play a part in salvation. His followers, called remonstrants, would codify his theology, and the Reformed churches would declare him heretics. Now understand that that's a small group calling them heretics. The Lutherans didn't do it. The Church of England didn't do it. Rome didn't really get involved in that. It's just the Dutch Reformed churches that would kick him out. And Arminius would have his greatest impact, however, not in the Netherlands, but eventually in England, especially in its Methodist expression. I should really say that his Wesleyan Methodist expression. There is a Calvinistic form of Methodism that was actually very popular in Wales, but in England it would be in its Wesleyan Methodist expression that Arminian theology would really find its home. Now, the debate between Wesleyans and Calvinists on this point of theology has been long and has been bitter. It has generally focused upon the differences, not the similarities, and at times accusations have been simplistic or just wrong. So there's been accusations that Wesleyans are Pelagian or semi-Pelagian. We're not. Or that we believe in a works-based righteousness, that you earn your way to heaven by doing good works. We're not. Or that Calvinists are fatalistic and mechanistic. Well, it's not true. And at times it has been a really bitter and ugly discussion. And there still seem to be people who want to get on their soapbox about this theological point. But what I want to reinforce in your head is, when we focus upon differences all the time, the gap often seems bigger than it really is. And in many ways, in the Calvinism-Wesleyanism debate, that gap is nowhere near as big as it seems. Indeed, John Wesley would describe himself as only a hair's breadth from Calvin. And Wesley has a fully developed Augustinian understanding of predestination in his theology. And we're going to look in a minute at some areas in which Wesley and Calvin fully agree on this matter. But I will warn you, though, just out of scholarly integrity as much as anything else, historical Wesley and modern Wesleyanism will sometimes sit in tension. So hear it from my own mouth, I have a very conservative view of Wesleyan Arminianism. In fact, in some places, I can make statements that will make Methodist pastors shocked. I have no problem talking about our doctrine of predestination or our doctrine of election. And to simply use those words in some Methodist circles is anathema. But I hold that you cannot understand Wesley without embracing them. I hold that we have a monergist, a form of salvation done only by God type of view. Some more modern Wesleyan folks will say it is more synergist, where God and human work together for salvation. And this has impacts in a whole lot of areas. You will see this even in your instructors in this class. Me and Kelly, even though we are both Arminian, we are both Methodist to the core, will disagree on nuances of monergism, synergism, to what extent is open theism a valid extension of Wesley and various things. What is the core behind Wesley's theology and understanding in this salvific mode? So just understand there is a bit of a tension. Modern Wesleyanism is not always espousing exactly what John Wesley espoused on this topic. Yet they're still Wesleyan and they're still within the bounds of what's allowed within the Free Methodist Church. Where do Wesley and Calvin agree? Well, they're going to agree that humans are totally depraved and in need of grace. There is no way a human can save themselves. There is no natural free will. Okay, what do I mean by that? It means that there is no free will until you have received God's grace. So, no human being can choose to not sin apart from grace. Okay? As human beings, we will sin. It is inevitable. There is no avoiding it. We cannot, by free will, choose to not sin. Only once grace is shown to us is there a freedom from sin. Sin will control us until grace is shown. No exceptions. And because of that, no human can claim merit for anything they do, even if that is done using divine grace. Both Wesley and Calvin are going to say that grace does the whole work. Here's part of the debate between more conservative Wesleyans and more liberal Wesleyans. The more conservative Wesleyans are going to focus on the monergist, on the Augustinian rooting of John Wesley. And that even where we involve free will in the salvific process, we don't actually do anything. We simply let it happen. Whereas the synergist is going to say more that it's about moving and working with God. Wesley and Calvin are also going to agree on election, that God has elected people to salvation. And that God has elected certain individuals to do certain works or hold certain positions. You might understand this better as calling. God has called certain people to be pastors. God has called certain people to be bishops. God has called certain people to be missionaries. Elected is just another language for that here. And with the elected to salvation, it's simply that God elects to save people. And they agree on that point. So what about where they disagree? They just agreed on a whole lot. Well, Calvin is going to say that grace is irresistible. Once grace is extended to you because God has chosen you, you cannot resist it. You are saved. Wesleyanism, grace is shown to all, and it is resistible. Okay. In fact, the thing that stops you being saved is not grace being absent, but your resistance to grace. And salvation becomes the moment you stop resisting. For Calvin, the eternal decree, the decree made by God with regards to salvation. Remember, both Calvin and Wesley will hold up the sovereignty of God. Calvin is going to say that the eternal decree is that the saved will believe. In other words, God's going to sit there and say, I choose to save Frank, Ahmed, Mafanwe, Jane, Lisa. And he'll have that long list of names he'll save, and he will then give those people faith and belief and show them irresistible grace, and they will be saved. For Wesley, the eternal decree isn't this list of names that God made, but is a decree that all who have faith and believe will be saved. This is the predestination. This is election in Wesley's film. So there is still predestination. There's still election. But what has changed is who is saved by the decree. For Calvin, God decrees by name and then saves those specific people. For Wesley, God decrees that all who have faith will be saved. For Calvin, then, salvation is something that cannot be lost, because grace is irresistible, and God has chosen the people who will save. That's it. End of story. For Wesley, faith is very fluid, and those who have faith, who believe, who choose to accept grace rather than resist it, they can start resisting grace again. And so backsliding is possible. Loss of salvation is possible. Because they can choose to start resisting again. They can go back to being trapped in sin. I do want to note here as well that we have to be careful when we're talking about where Wesley and Calvin disagree as well. So there's two forms of Calvinism, infralapsarianism and supralapsarianism. In infralapsarianism, it's simply a case of humankind falls and then God elects to save some and just saves them. In supralapsarianism, God elected people to salvation before the fall and thus also elected to create people just so that they would not be created. Elected to not save people, and so he elected that they would be sent to eternal punishment, i.e. he created them just so that they could be punishment. Wesley's going to react primarily to supralapsarianism. Although he likes the sovereignty of God very much, he is going to ultimately say God is a God of love and would not create people simply to punish them. So Wesley primarily reacts against supralapsarianism, which is more a stance of Theodore Beza and some later scholars than of Calvin, who was an infralapsarian. So what do these look like in very simple terms? Well, for Calvinism, there's a group of people, and God chooses to save two of them. And so through Jesus' atoning work, justifying grace, faith, the whole package is given to those two people. Out of those five, those two are the two saved. They cannot be unsaved. There is no way to change the fact that God has chosen to save those. The other three, there's no way they can be saved. They are cut off from grace, and without grace, they are left in their sin. For Wesley, preventing grace is going to be shown to the whole group of five. And those who respond are redeemed. I do apologize for that yawn. Those who respond are redeemed. The two who choose to put up a barrier and resist grace are not saved. So in fact, at one point, all five of those people would have those lines representing a barrier. And through prevening grace, three of them, remember the prevening grace was shown to all five, three of them made the choice to stop resisting grace. Okay? They could not have made that choice if preventing grace hadn't been there. If prevening grace had not been there. But two of them enjoy being slaves to sin, apparently, so they are refusing to give in to grace. So in this way, in Methodism, salvation is not the moment you say yes to God. It's the moment you stop saying no. Understand the difference there. Yes means you have to go in full affirmation. You've got to dive in. Yes, I will do it. But by saying it's actually a not no, it's that moment you stop resisting, that moment you surrender. So maybe it's that moment you just give in and say, okay. It doesn't have to be hugely enthusiastic, because it's not us that does the saving work. It's God who comes in as soon as we stop resisting. So there's the very broad distinction between Calvinism and Wesleyanism. It is a huge topic with many, many nuances. If you want to chat with someone really in depth about this, Chris Hill's a great person to chat to. This is one of his kind of big specialist study areas that he reads a lot on. But however, with time moving on, I need to keep going, and because we're going to look at the second topic, the topic of German Lutheran pietism. That rather strapping fellow is a guy by the name of Philip Jacob Spener, who was a very key figure in German Lutheran pietism. So, what is German Lutheran pietism? It's a movement to renew German Lutheranism in the late 1600s. German Lutheranism had become very intellectualized, very heady form focused on correct doctrine during the early 1600s, and had lost a lot of the spirit, the trust, the heart piece. And German Lutheran pietism was about recovering the place of the heart within faith, and about reviving the church through personal spiritual renewal. It was a huge revival. German Lutheranism had actually hit quite a crisis in the mid-1600s, and German Lutheran pietism is what would bring it revival. And the key people include Johann Arndt, who wrote the first text in this area, True Christianity, Philip Jakob Spener, Pia Desideria, Desiring Piety. That would be a huge impact in this movement. And a guy named August Hermann Franke, who had set up a place called Halle, and the Halle Pietists. So this is the front cover of Spener's Pia Desideria. This kind of became the manifesto for the Pietists. It was about extensive use of the Word of God in people's lives, and about how Christianity is love put into practice. As I said, this is a movement about bringing the heart back into what had become very intellectualized form of Christianity. So Christianity is love put into practice. One of its big things was a focus on piety and holy living for church leaders, along with studies in seminary. Does that sound anything familiar to a head, heart, hands formation plan? Not just ticking the boxes for our clergy. So a focus on piety and holy living, as well as the education piece. It's in pietism that we get our small groups heritage. So here's a little bit of a track as how that came to us. So it starts out with this movement, Philip Jakob Spener, starting groups midweek to discuss the sermon he preached that Sunday. This is where pietism really began to explode, and what started as a small group of like 6 or 8 became 300-400 people trying to cram into the church or the seminary. And it predominantly focused on heart issues. You know, what are you implementing from the sermon this week? Why are you not? Where is your heart this week? How does that look? And you'll really see how that comes to the fore in Wesley in a minute. And it got to Wesley, and even though he never met Philip Jacob Spener in person, Spener was godfather to a guy by the name of Zinzendorf, Count Zinzendorf, of the Moravian Brethren. And Wesley would spend time with the Moravians, and he learned about small groups and discipleship by inquiring about people's heart issues from them. And so he would develop his own discipleship structure based around this small groups understanding that comes from pietism. And it focused a lot on something called orthocardia. So you're used to hearing about orthodoxy, which is right thought. You're used to hearing about orthopraxis, which is correct action. Wesley would talk about orthocardia, correct heart. And so as he took this small group discipleship pursuit of piety and holy living and heart-oriented faith, Wesley developed what would become known as the band system. This is mostly a small group system, but it's going to be more robust and cover more than any band system, any small group system you've seen before. First of all is the society. This is the main weekly meeting of Methodists in an area. Do not read worship service here. Okay? Wesley's Methodist followers were all members of the Church of England. they went to the Church of England service on a Sunday. Then, one day during the week, the society, that is just the Methodists, would meet for the Methodist Society meeting. Okay? So in the church on Sunday, you had Methodists and non-Methodists. It was the Church of England worship service. During the week, you had the society meeting, which was the meeting of the Methodists in the area. And it happened weekly, and it would be somewhat like a service, though it was mostly, they'd be preaching, exhortation, there would be prayer, but it's not quite a full worship service. It didn't require an ordained person to be there like an act of worship with Eucharist. So that was one thing. Then all the Methodists, as well as going to the society meeting during the week, they all had to be part of a class. A class was a group of up to 12 people. It was at the heart of Methodist discipleship, and all society members had to be in a class. So if you were a Methodist, you went to church on Sunday, you went to the society meeting during the week, and you went to a class meeting. This is where a lot of Spainer's work would come in. Let's discuss the sermon as it was during the week. Let's talk about our situations. How are you showing Jesus in your life? How are you not showing Jesus in your life? It's about working out their salvation and pursuit of holiness together. So in groups of up to 12. Now then, if you were really serious about pursuing holiness, about pursuing a good heart disposition, you could also be part of the band. So there were several bands. The thing about bands is they were a group of 5 or 6 people, always of the same sex, same marital status, and similar age. These were optional. And this was like accountability on steroids. There was always some accountability in the class. But in the band, you had a very highly accountable group, intense pursuit of holiness. They were brutal with themselves. When he said, how have I lived like Jesus today? How have I not lived like Jesus today? And where am I struggling in my faith right now? Where am I doing well in my faith right now? What are my growing edges? When you ask them those kind of questions, they were brutal on themselves and hold themselves up to such a high standard. Far higher than you and me are normally used to. Especially far higher than we would admit to a group of 3 or 4 people other than ourselves. And then, if you were a leader or really some of the most faithful people, so you were doing society, class, and band, then you would also do the select society during the week. This is where the most faithful were trained weekly in the doctrines and practice of Methodism. This is really where new leaders were cultivated. The select society were expected to be in a band as well. So if you're in the select society, you were doing worship, society meeting, class meeting, band meeting, and the select society training every week. That is a lot of discipleship. And then finally, there was another piece for Wesley's group, which was the penitent band, which was for lapsed Methodists. So the rules for Methodists were pretty strict. We maybe aren't as strict as Methodism used to be, but if there was someone was fine and then they started being an alcoholic, their membership would be revoked and they'd be put in the penitent band if they wanted to rejoin, if they wanted to become a member of the society again. If a guy was cheating on his spouse, he would have to go through the penitent band. All sorts of reasons why you might have to go through the penitent band. But essentially you had broken the rules for living, or you were rejecting the theology of the group, or something. There was something that meant your relationship with the identity of the society was not right. And so your membership would be revoked, and you could either just not come anymore, which was up to you, or if you wanted to keep being a part of the group, you had to be part of the penitent band. So you would still have to do the society meeting, you would have to do the class, you wouldn't have a vote, but you'd have to be part of the penitent band. And for that, the minister or the leader of the society would lead people through the penitent band. This is the method of the Methodists. This is the pursuit of holiness. And we'll look again in week 10 about how this ties into Christian perfection and the pursuit of entire sanctification and such, and the pursuit of holiness. But this is the method. Okay? Wesley's method was not something he cooked up out of his own head. It's something he brought from the German Lutheran Pietists. And you cannot understand Wesleyan theology, especially around the pursuit of holiness and discipleship, unless you first understand this system of discipleship. The society, the class, the band, the select society, the penitent band. Because this is one intense discipleship system. Pietism, however, has another contribution, and that's the idea of global mission. You know, we have the Free Methodist World Missions. Working through Free Methodist World Missions, we have Set Free Movement, we have SEED, we have ICCM. All of that also comes from the Pietists. You see, during the 1500s and 1600s, Catholic mission had spread around the world. The Jesuits had done a huge amount. Why do you think most of the world is Catholic today? The Jesuits going to South America, Asia, Africa, all over the place. However, at the same time, as I said at the beginning, Protestant mission had not. Protestants were more concerned about arguing amongst themselves or converting Catholics to Protestants. The thing with the Pietists, though, is their heart disposition. Their focus upon emotion as well as intellectual and what was correct doctrine meant their hearts started saying, we need to go. We need to win souls for Christ. The Halopietists were especially driven by this. And it started with that building in the bottom right hand corner of this slide. That is the orphanage at Halle. And the Halopietists were so driven to compassion at the number of orphans they saw around them that they built the orphanage. And then they were like, well, if these children need us to clothe them and feed them and teach them about Christ, who else might need to? And so you begin to see missions. In fact, one of the first Protestant missions was done by a man called Bartholomäus Ziegenbalg. You can see him on that stamp there, and he set up a mission in a place called Tranquebar in India. The church he set up in Tranquebar is still there in India to this day. It was the first evangelical mission outside of Europe, and it was done by the Pietists. And all because they're shifting the focus of their faith from intellectualism to heart-based piety, push them to mission. This is why often we talk about how mission is something that when you reflect on God and what you've done, how you've sinned, and then what He has done for you, when you engage in that heart-driven cycle, the output is always, always mission. And then One final big area that the Halopietists would contribute to was something called SPCK. This would become very big, especially in England. Stands for the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge. They actually still exist. The SPCK was printing and translating Bibles long before the British Bible Society came around. Even though the British Bible Society would claim to have been the first and the biggest, it wasn't. The SPCK was there well before them. And the SPCK would also, their literature would be very influential on a woman named Susanna Wesley, who would end up being the mother of John Wesley. So this focus upon mission, the focus upon evangelism and converting the poor, and that isn't something that necessarily comes from the first evangelical awakening. It was already kind of there, lying in wait, that the Halopietists had prepped it all with their heart focus, and that even then it's important to note that John Wesley doesn't really become evangelical very much until he starts to dig in more to the heart side of things. And when he first begins writing about it, it's often the influence of his mother, Susanna, who's influenced by the SPCK, this branch of German Lutheran Pietism. So that is Pietism's other contribution, our emphasis upon global mission. They were the first, they were the pioneers. And that's partly their influence on Wesley that keeps us focused upon that. So what are your assignments this week? I have changed up the reading from the syllabus, so be aware this is going to look a little bit different from your syllabus. Okay? So first of all is a PDF, Olson, The Story of Christian Theology. Pages 454 to 472. This is the story of Arminius and his theologians. And then just to try and balance things for you, Olson is going to talk about the synergism of Arminius. And so just so you keep the full sides of the debate on this thing, I want you to read one of two short web articles. Either is Arminian theology synergistic or monogism, synergism, and Arminianism. Just read one of those. They're going to give you the counterpoint to Olson. Olson is going to say Arminianism is synergistic. These articles are going to say Arminianism is monogistic. So I just want you to see the whole thing in there. Next one, Diane Butler Bass. Just a short reading, only 5 pages, from her Social History, A People's History of Christianity. And that's just going to be about the heart impact of the Halopietists. And then if any of you want to really dive into Wesleyan predestination, the optional reading is the chapter on predestination from Odin's 4-volume work on Wesley. You've already done some readings from Wesley and from Odin, and we've had like the reading on grace and the reading on baptism and communion. And he seems to be able to communicate at a level very suitable for this class. Still, this is probably one of the better chapters I have read on predestination in terms of just espousing what Wesley thought without getting too bogged down in detail. So it's well worth a read. Remember, this will give you, it is a book about Wesley specifically, so it is telling you John Wesley's viewpoint, which is still the foundation of what everything evolved from in Wesleyanism. Finally, your discussion questions for this week. 2 questions and then case study. So, as a participant in the Free Methodist Church credentialing process, we try to develop your head, heart, and hands. Which of these 3 is your strongest? Which is your weakest? Okay. After looking at the heart-focused, the Pietists, and Methodism, how do you intend to strengthen your heart? So this is me pushing you to be thinking about that heart formation plan that you need for your final project. Okay. 2, what do small groups look like in your church? What elements of Wesley's band system are present? Use these slides to help you. What elements are missing? Would the fullness of Wesley's band system make sense in your context? 200 words. And then finally, your case study. While seeking to minister to the poor and disenfranchised, your church draws in a man who is dealing with a drug addiction. He gets clean, accepts Jesus, and is being discipled. Members of the church help him with food, clothing, and furnishings. One member gives him a job. But after 6 months, he relapses, loses his job, and burns several church members. He gets clean again and is embraced by the church a second time, only to relapse again. Then he comes back to the church a third time looking for financial help and support in his recovery. What do you do? 150 words. So there are your assignments for this week. I hope you have a good one, and I will see you online. Bye.